familiar classic rock tune informs us everybody wants to rule the world. The people who wrote that song obviously were not acquainted with Dr. Ron Paul. Unique among contemporary political figures, Dr. Paul has no desire to rule anybody, but rather to restore the rule of law that is indispensable to the protection of individual liberty. For every other candidate seeking the presidency, all human progress begins with the bureaucrat and the armed enforcer who implements that bureaucrat's decrees. Ron Paul understands that all progress begins with the free individual, who is the owner of his life and deserves individual deserves to keep everything he has earned, everything he has earned. Dr. Paul likewise understands that while the right of armed self-defense is indispensable, no government ever improved a person's life by pointing guns at him. For decades, he has courageously opposed the untethered madness of drug prohibition and every other front of the government's ever-escalating war against the Bill of Rights. He does this not because drug addiction is harmless, it isn't, but because there is no deadlier narcotic than power. And government has no authority to dictate what people freely choose to consume. The same government that conjures new powers out of the ether colludes with a quasi-private criminal syndicate called the Federal Reserve to debase the currency in order to fund its grandiose designs. And for decades, Dr. Paul, often alone, has worked to expose the crimes of that officially licensed counterfeiting ring and its role in making debt slaves out of us and our children. And he has waged an unrelenting campaign to end the reign of terror conducted by the world's most notorious three-letter secret police agency, the IRS. Alone among Republican contenders, Dr. Paul seeks to restore a foreign policy compatible with that of Washington, Jefferson, and John Quincy Adams. He alone is committed to the actual defense of our country, rather than perpetual military entanglements in the affairs of other countries that do nothing to protect our freedom. Were the framers of our Constitution to interview the current crop of presidential hopefuls, it would immediately become clear that Dr. Paul is the only one with whom they could have an intelligent conversation. That is because the language of liberty is his native tongue, not some unfamiliar dialect from which he borrows an occasional phrase for use during election campaigns. The most important qualification for the presidency is an understanding of the Constitution and the character to preserve, protect, and defend it. Dr. Paul's rivals for the nomination recognize those qualities in him, which is why during debates they habitually defer to his insights whenever constitutional questions are being addressed. And this is why Dr. Paul is the only candidate who, if elected, could take the oath of office without committing an act of public perjury. Who are blessed to live in Idaho have been given a rare opportunity to cast a consequential vote on behalf of peace, prosperity, and individual liberty in next month's caucuses. Please don't let that opportunity be wasted. Shakespeare wrote, "There is a tide in the affairs of men which taken at the flood leads to fortune, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures." Dr. Paul has helped summon a wave of peaceful, principled rebellion against a government that has long since slipped the chains of the Constitution. Regardless of what happens at the ballot box this November, that wave will continue to grow. But it can, and it must carry this uniquely qualified and decent man to the Oval Office. If God is unusually generous, and the American people are wiser than we've recently been, my friends and my fellow Idahoans, I give you the next President of the United States, Dr. Ron Paul.
Welcome and a wonderful introduction by Will, and I appreciate it very much. It sounds like this must be the state of freedom out here. Everybody who's put so much effort into, because you had at least 3 months to get ready for this function, didn't you? And all of a sudden, a lot of people show up. That means the issue of liberty is alive and well and growing. That's what I believe, and I think that's what I'm witnessing right here today. Great to be among so many friends, and Elizabeth, it's great to see you again, and appreciate very much all your work over the years. And I can't help but think about somebody that was a very, very good friend of Elizabeth and mine and many of you people here, because I can't think of Idaho without thinking about liberty, without thinking about Ralph Smee. There is no doubt. He was always convinced ideas did have consequences, and I think that's absolutely true. Also with me today is my wife, Carol, of 55 years of marriage. And we have one of our 18 grandchildren, Linda's with us today. Out here to the Northwest has been fantastic. It's much more than I had anticipated, and the turnouts have been great, and the enthusiasm is great. But the big job we have is translating that into a few victories, and that's what we're looking forward to. There's been a lot of work and effort put into the campaign and all the efforts, and there's a lot of good news out there that's not quite yet on the mainstream media. You know, they don't always report what's going on. And the delegate count is coming along quite well, and we have an opportunity to add quite a few more delegates right here in this state. But our country has we've gotten ourselves into a big mess. And the one thing different from 5 years ago or even 10 years ago is that most Americans realize it now. For a long time, we've kept our head in the sand, and people were in denial. They didn't want to worry about tomorrow. If you can live for today and you can borrow more money, prices of houses are going up, we can keep borrowing and live hog forever and ever. But all of a sudden, the big bubble has burst. We've had small bubbles bursting all along. The big bubble started in 1971 when the last link of gold to our dollar was taken away. And that ushered in this huge bubble. And that is the reason we can't ignore monetary policy. We will address monetary policy, and we will address the subject of the Federal Reserve System and the return to a gold standard. Yeah! was started in 1913. Matter of fact, we have 1 year to go for the 100th anniversary. Wouldn't it be a neat time that we repealed the Federal Reserve Act? The system that we have, whether we get around to repealing the law, one thing is this system can't continue. And that's what American people have discovered now. We cannot keep borrowing and spending and printing money, more regulations. We do too much of it, it causes a crisis. So what do they do in Washington? They spend even more money, they print more money, they regulate even more, and they turn it over to the Fed and they print more money, and they wonder why it doesn't solve our problems. Well, they have their head in the sand, and they are in denial. They're not willing to say that economic interventionism, Keynesianism, paper money doesn't work. The founders knew that. That's why they gave us a document that said there shouldn't be a central bank, that only gold and silver could be legal tender, and that you could not print money. So they knew it back then. We ought to take their advice and change our way of living today. Fateful year of 1913, we had a few other things going on. We had not only the Federal Reserve coming into existence, we had that other little document changed, the 16th Amendment, which needs to be repealed, obviously. The income tax in a free society is not appropriate. If you want to live in a true republic and a government dedicated to protection of liberty, you don't need to declare ownership of everybody's income and then permit each and every one of us a certain percentage that we can keep. That principle of ownership of all that we earn has to be challenged, because it comes from a very basic understanding. Our lives and our liberties come from our Creator, not from our government. The natural consequence of that is we ought to have the right to keep the fruits of our labor. But also in the Woodrow Wilson era, our foreign policy was changed, and he took it, and it was always, he based it on a form of idealism, false idealism. His idealism was that it is the moral obligation of the American people to make the whole world safe for democracy. Well, it hasn't been very safe since 1914, and certainly the goal shouldn't be this dedication to pure democracy. Matter of fact, pure democracy undermines the republic. That's what the founders worried about. They wanted a republic, not a pure democracy. And yet, over this last 100 years, there was an evolution. We went from a republic to a democracy. Now, rights are relative. They're relative to the demands of the majority. The majority becomes the dictatorship, and certain groups get together. They get together and they gang up on the productive system. The non-productive, the special interests, gang up on the individuals who basically are the middle class, who's willing to work and take care of themselves, and all with the pretense that we're going to help the very, very poor who are falling through the cracks. But guess who gets all the help? The very wealthy, who are tied into the banking system, tied into the Federal Reserve, tied into the military-industrial complex, tied into the lobbying system, and all the power that we have in Washington. So we have changed our course of history by accepting a form of government that is not compatible with our Constitution. Now, it is true that we could have changed our Constitution systematically if this is what we wanted. But we didn't want it. We ignored the Constitution. So the solution is very simple. Send only people to Washington who believe in and will obey the Constitution. government and our country would be a lot wealthier. Instead of spending $4 trillion worth of debt overseas in the last 10 years, that $4 trillion would have been spent here at home. And there would be a lot more wealth.